Get out of that seat right now! The voice sliced through the cabin like a blade. Laura Bennett, the lead flight attendant, stood stiff with authority, her finger aimed squarely at Darius Thompson as if commanding a trespasser, not a man who owned 35% of the very airline she worked for. Darius, calm but confused, looked up from his laptop in seat 2A. He had barely powered it on before chaos landed at his feet. "I beg your pardon?" he asked, his voice steady but puzzled. "You're not on the list," Laura said sharply, motioning for a white woman behind her, Patricia Evans, who clutched a folded stack of $100 bills like a backstage pass to entitlement. Patricia leaned forward and whispered just loud enough, "$5,000, and he's in my seat?" The words weren't meant for Darius, but they hit him harder than any turbulence. And then came the smirk. Laura's lips curled ever so slightly as she nodded toward Officer Sarah Kim waiting at the jetway. In less than 2 minutes, Darius found himself surrounded, his presence questioned, his dignity under siege. Around him, first-class passengers pretended to ignore what was unfolding, though some subtly pulled out their phones, hoping to catch a viral moment. The cabin wasn't just pressurized by altitude, it was packed with judgment. "This can't be happening," Darius muttered, activating his phone's recorder. "I need this on the record." He was no stranger to storms like this. "You're not supposed to be here," Laura repeated, now with a laugh behind her eyes. "First class is for our important guests," Patricia added with a chuckle. "He doesn't look the part. Now does he?" The way she said it, like his skin, his presence, his calm composure were somehow incompatible with row 2A, made Darius feel like a guest in a country that still hadn't fully welcomed him. "Before we continue, I want to know, where are you watching from today? And have you ever been told you didn't belong, just because of how you looked? If this moment speaks to you, hit subscribe, and if you've lived it, share your story in the comments." Michael Carter, the flight's operations supervisor, stepped in next, waving a tablet like it was gospel. "Your ticket's fraudulent," he announced. "You need to vacate immediately before we call in security." His voice was loud, meant for the surrounding passengers to hear and confirm their assumptions. Laura chimed in over the radio. "Passenger in 2A not listed on VIP manifest. Repeat, not on manifest." Patricia leaned closer to the tablet. "Flag him. Put him on the no-fly list." The command rolled out of her mouth with the comfort of someone used to being obeyed. "You're making a mistake," Darius said, still composed, but his jaw clenched now. He kept recording. "Everything you say is being documented," he added, and there was a flicker of unease in Michael's eyes. But still, he laughed and said, "You're nobody. Man, you don't get to record us," Patricia shouted. "This seat is for someone who matters." And Michael, without looking at Darius, added, "He's just causing a scene." A few passengers snickered. One leaned over to whisper, "Another attention seeker." Darius's chest tightened as he stared at the silver trim on the seat back in front of him. He blinked hard. He wouldn't give them tears. Not now. Not ever. Still recording. He spoke into his phone. "Let this serve as proof. Let this show what they do to people like me." The words came slow, deliberate, each one laced with something deeper than anger. It was history. It was memory. It was exhaustion. Then came the fourth and most personal jab. Laura, speaking into her crew earpiece, said flatly, "There's no way this guy's a CEO." Patricia reached for his laptop without warning. "You've had your little tech toy long enough," she sneered as she yanked it away. Darius leaned forward instinctively, reclaiming it with calm strength. "You'll regret that," he said, not as a threat, but as a prophecy. Then silence. For just a moment. Not the quiet of peace, but the hush before something shifts, before something breaks. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory returned like a cold hand on his neck. It was 2005. A panel of investors, all white, had told a young, brilliant Darius that despite his credentials, "You're just not quite what we're looking for." The sting of those words had followed him through every pitch meeting, every late-night coding at his small desk, every doubt he crushed with success. He built tech trend innovations from his own money and grit. When Skylux became unstable, he didn't just invest, he bought in deep, 35%. That's how much he believed in making change from the inside. But today, in seat 2A, none of that seemed to matter, because his face, his skin, his presence in first class didn't align with the image they had in mind. At seat 2B, David Lee, Tech Trend's Director of Communications, had been watching everything unfold. His hands trembled as he began drafting an email on his phone. "To Skylux Executive Board," he typed. "Urgent misconduct on Flight SK-123, video evidence attached." He glanced sideways at Darius and gave a quiet nod. Across the aisle, Emma Chen, seated in 3C, lifted her phone. She had already recorded 3 minutes of Laura's interaction and Patricia's comments. She whispered to herself, "This needs to be seen." Behind the curtain, James Patel, a junior flight attendant, stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or shrink. His knuckles whitened around a stack of service trays. His eyes met Darius's for a split second. Then there was Officer Sarah Kim, still at the gate, getting updates via radio. She'd seen this sort of thing before, not this blatant, not this cruel, but she'd seen the pattern. Today, it had a name, a face, a seat number, and then something shifted. Darius, still seated, typed a brief message to Skylux CEO Elizabeth Ward. It read, "Check Laura Bennett's complaint history, check Patricia Evans's access records, you'll find what you need." Moments later, a reply pinged back on his screen. 3 bias complaints, 1 pending suspension. You were never off the list. Mr. Thompson. David's email sent, Emma's video uploaded to X with the caption, "This is how Skylux treats their own." In 5 minutes, it hit 5,000 views. In 6, it hit 9,000. Passengers around Darius stopped whispering. Some leaned forward. Others picked up their phones, not to record him, but to follow him. Laura's face drained of color. Patricia reached for her purse like it might shield her. "You're done," Darius said softly, eyes never leaving hers. His voice wasn't raised. He didn't need to yell, because justice was no longer a whisper in his chest. It was a storm in motion, and he was done asking to be seen. The air in the cabin had changed, not just with pressure, but with purpose. Darius Thompson sat still in seat 2A, his phone recording as if it were his only weapon. The digital heartbeat of justice pulsed in his hand. But Laura Bennett wasn't done. "He's creating a disturbance," she barked, loud enough for the front 3 rows to hear. Her voice rose higher than professionalism permitted, now fueled by something far older, far uglier. "He's refusing to comply with crew instructions." Patricia Evans leaned in over Laura's shoulder and radioed in mock horror. "Mark him as a disruptive passenger. Deny boarding now." Michael Carter, the operations supervisor, returned, this time pushing Darius's seat back forward with a sneer. "Get him out. Drag him if we have to." The force wasn't physical yet, but the words were violence enough. "Is there even a reason for this?" James Patel, the junior flight attendant, asked nervously, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked to Patricia for some justification. "Because I said so," she snapped, "and I don't need to explain myself to staff." Her words made James flinch. A chorus of murmurs began to rise among the passengers. Some disgusted, others entertained. "Throw him off the plane," someone shouted from row 4. "Fake ticket, fake CEO." Darius turned slightly in his seat, his voice low but deliberate. "This footage is being backed up. You're not hiding anything." He wasn't pleading anymore. He was recording the unraveling of a system that had humiliated men like him for centuries, and was foolish enough to think this time would be different. Michael grinned and leaned closer. "You're banned, buddy, and you don't even know it yet." He tapped the screen of his Skylux staff tablet and, with a smug flick, declared, "No fly list. Enjoy the bus." Patricia, now emboldened, whispered to Laura, "He's a nobody, and he's lucky we're not pressing charges." Laura nodded and called out to the flight deck, "Security needed. Escalation imminent." It was the language of protocol, used not to protect, but to isolate. Hushed laughter drifted from seat 1C. "This guy really thought he belonged in first class?" someone muttered. Patricia stood again, this time holding up 5 crisp $1,000 bills as if that alone could justify a crime. "Here. This paid for my seat. Get him out." Michael turned toward Darius and added with a wink, "You should have just taken the money and walked away." Darius didn't blink. The truth doesn't need a bribe. But then, the unthinkable. Laura reached over and locked the sliding door to the first-class section. "We're securing the area," she said, lips tight, eyes hollow, then, with swift motion. Michael grabbed Darius's phone. "Enough with your damn recording!" The phone clattered to the ground, its screen still on, still capturing everything. But Darius knew better. He'd already uploaded a backup to the cloud, in his mind. Another wound reopened. It was 2010. He had been detained by airport security at this very terminal, LAX, because someone thought he looked nervous. They never apologized. No one ever did. That night, he swore he'd someday build the technology that could prevent this. That promise became Tech Trend Innovations. That vision led him to buy 35% of Skylux Airlines. That pain carved the armor he wore now. Near the galley, James stood frozen. He just overheard Laura whisper to Michael, "Passengers like him? They don't own seats like this. They clean them." His stomach turned. Something in him cracked. He texted David Lee, "Flight SK-123, racist comments, audio proof. Sending now." Across the aisle. Emma Chen lifted her phone again. This time, she caught it, the tone in Laura's voice, the deliberate use of his type, and Patricia's gloating. Emma uploaded the video with a caption that would explode across the internet. "Skylux Airlines, first class, if you're the right color." Within 2 minutes, the video hit 200,000 views. Retweets piled in. The anger online was seismic. Back in the cabin, a woman in row 4 started crying, quietly mouthing, "I'm so sorry." Others whispered now, not in ridicule, but in disbelief. And then, Darius saw it. James's message to David had gone viral too. A screenshot of internal crew messages, posted anonymously, showed exactly what no airline wanted the world to see. VIPs flagged white first unless override by management. Those 6 words undid the illusion Skylux had built for decades. Emma added the image to her post, updated the caption, "This isn't just about one flight, it's policy." Now it was everywhere. 500,000 views. Darius didn't speak. He didn't need to. The cabin was watching him differently now. Not as a man causing trouble, but as a man unearthing truth. From the gate bridge, passengers were trickling back in, furious. Some had seen the video before they even reboarded. Others had read the hashtags now trending across X. Hashtag Skylux Disgrace. Hashtag Who Owns 2A. Hashtag Tech Trend Truth. One woman in a power suit shouted toward the cockpit, Is this how your airline treats your investors? Laura paled. Patricia backed toward the curtain. Michael tried to shut the door to Coach. The world had caught up, and no one was ready. Back in his seat, Darius opened his backup phone. His thumb hovered over the screen, then typed quickly. Dear Board, SK-123 incident escalating. Flight crew involved in biased behavior. Recommend immediate review. Footage enclosed. Darius Thompson. He sent it to the Skylux Executive Board, then to the FAA, then to the Department of Transportation. His inbox chimed a moment later. David's reply. Confirmed. Dottie watching. Elizabeth is aware. Eyes on you. Darius closed his eyes. Just for a moment. For the first time in 20 minutes, he took a full breath. At the same time, Emma posted another update, a slow-motion replay of Laura grabbing Darius's phone, overlaid with Patricia's quote, He's nobody. He doesn't belong. The caption read, What if he owns the plane? It passed 1 million views in under 90 seconds. Now passengers started moving. One man stood up and said, This is wrong, another asked. Can he stay? A child asked her father. What did he do? The father didn't answer. Inside the cockpit, Laura hissed to Michael. Shut it down, Michael whispered. Too late. Patricia was trembling now. Her money couldn't quiet what had been unleashed. Darius looked over at her. It was never just a seat, he said. It was a symbol, and now it's a statement. She looked away, for the first time. She had nothing to say. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as if reacting to the tension boiling beneath them. Then came the click of the jet bridge door, the soft hiss of hydraulics, and the unmistakable rasp of a police radio. Officer Sarah Kim stepped aboard Skylux Flight SK-123 with a trained neutrality on her face. But even she couldn't mask the surprise in her eyes when she saw Darius, calm, collected, seated in 2A, wrists folded on his lap like a man waiting for an apology rather than an arrest. Laura met her halfway down the aisle, voice loud, hands flailing. That's him! He refused to comply! He's belligerent! He threatened staff! Behind her, Michael Carter threw Darius's boarding pass onto the floor like a discarded receipt and shouted, The guy's got no authority here. He's not on the manifest. Probably used someone else's credentials. Patricia stood smugly nearby, arms folded, watching Sarah like she expected immediate compliance with her version of events. He's been filming and disrupting passengers, she added, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. The passengers, however, were no longer passive. Emma's latest video had crossed 1 million views. Screens glowed throughout the cabin. People weren't whispering anymore. They were watching. They were listening. And they were choosing sides. Patricia leaned toward Darius, lowered her voice, and said through gritted teeth, You don't scare me. Darius didn't flinch. You should be scared of the truth, he replied, softly. Then she turned to Sarah and snapped. He doesn't belong here, Michael added. He's trying to impersonate a CEO. Laura, who hadn't stopped moving since the officer arrived, clutched her earpiece and said, Cabin is destabilized. Recommend removal. Darius looked up at Sarah, finally meeting her eyes. Would you like to see the footage? He asked, voice even, restrained, but vibrating with a deeper current of hurt and dignity, before she could answer. Patricia reached over and shut his laptop screen. Enough, she barked. Sarah took a slow breath, scanned the cabin, and asked, Is there a physical threat here? Laura jumped in. Yes, he's hostile. But James, the junior flight attendant, stepped forward from the galley and said firmly, No, he hasn't raised his voice. He hasn't moved. He hasn't even left his seat. Patricia turned on James with a scowl. Stay out of this. But it was too late. The truth was growing teeth. Sarah's radio chirped again, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked down and saw the phone that Darius had dropped. Still recording. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and saw herself reflected back, along with 5 minutes of footage already time-stamped and uploading to cloud storage. "Sir," she said carefully. "Are you willing to stop filming?" Darius answered. "The moment I stop needing to..." From the rear of the cabin, a passenger shouted, "This is insane! Let the man fly!" Another said, "He's the only one acting with any decency." Patricia's mouth opened to object again, but this time Darius spoke over her. "You said I don't belong?" he said quietly, standing for the first time, his voice steady. "Let's talk about that." His tone shifted, sharpened, not loud, but firm like steel drawn from velvet. "You deleted my boarding pass from the manifest. You locked the cabin door. You attempted to confiscate my personal devices, and then you told the police I was dangerous." Every word struck like a hammer. "All because I didn't look the way you expected someone in seat 2A to look." Emma was now live streaming. Over 100,000 people were watching in real time. The screen was split. On one side, Darius standing tall. On the other, the documents David had just sent her, a breakdown of Skylux's internal booking protocols, showing a bias algorithm that auto-prioritized white surnames for upgrades unless a manager manually adjusted them. The caption read, "Internal bias at 3,000 feet." The stream caught Laura trying to whisper something into her headset, caught Michael checking his phone with a look of growing panic, caught Patricia sliding a wad of cash back into her purse. Sarah's face remained unreadable, but she stepped back from Darius and asked, "Sir, do you have identification?" Darius opened his wallet, pulled out a card, and handed it to her. It read, "Darius Thompson, Chief Executive Officer, Tech Trend Innovations, Skylux Board Member." She stared at it, then at the cabin crew. "He's on your board?" she asked, half in disbelief. Michael stammered, We weren't aware." Laura turned pale. Patricia dropped into her seat like the wind had been knocked from her. And still, the footage climbed. Now at 2 million views. David's internal email had also been leaked. Elizabeth Ward, the CEO of Skylux, had just received 4 separate media inquiries in 10 minutes. Darius's phone buzzed with a new notification. FAA requested full incident report. DOT investigating. Another email popped up. CNN requesting live statement. Sarah looked at the screen and said quietly, "This is bigger than me." Darius nodded once. "Yes, officer. It is." Then came the final humiliation. Patricia stood again and hissed. "You think this is over?" Darius turned to her and said clearly, for all to hear, "You just made this public. I'm going to make it permanent." His voice was not angry. It was resolute, like someone who had waited his whole life to stop running. Behind him, the door to the cockpit opened slowly. A pilot peeked out. "What's going on?" he asked nervously. Laura didn't answer. She couldn't. The cabin had flipped. What began as silent complicity had erupted into loud disapproval. "Let him fly," someone chanted. Another added. "This is 2025, not 1955, a third said. "This man owns part of your company." Patricia covered her face. Michael sat down heavily. Laura stared at nothing. Sarah looked at her radio again, then walked to Darius. "Sir, you're free to remain. You're not under investigation." She unlocked the handcuffs. They hadn't even been placed yet. But the gesture mattered. It echoed through the silence like thunder. Darius looked around the cabin. His seat was still there, his laptop closed, his name still missing from the flight's display screen. But something had changed. The fear was gone, not just from him, but from the passengers who now knew the truth. As Sarah turned to leave, Emma's live stream caught her expression. Half officer, half witness. A caption beneath the screen read, "When justice boards the plane." Darius sat down in 2A again. No announcement was made, no apology offered, but everyone knew what had just happened. He didn't need to say it. The world was already watching. In a glass-walled executive boardroom nearly 2,000 miles away in downtown Chicago, the Skylux Airlines headquarters was already unraveling. Monitors blinked red with alerts. One screen showed the plummeting stock price, down 17% in the last 30 minutes. Another tracked hashtags surging across social platforms. Hashtag Who Owns 2A. Hashtag Skylux Disgrace. Hashtag Flyfair Now. Elizabeth Ward. Skylux's beleaguered CEO paced behind her desk, phone to her ear, voice tight with disbelief. "What do you mean he owns 35% of the company?" she hissed, glaring at her VP of Operations, who only managed a meek shrug. "Why wasn't I notified this was Darius Thompson's flight?" No one answered. Across the table, legal counsel whispered into her own phone, eyebrows raised in alarm. An intern ran in and dropped a printed transcript of the leaked crew messages that James had released. Highlighted sections showed clear patterns of racial bias and unauthorized flagging of VIP seats. "They've got receipts," someone muttered. Elizabeth slammed her palm against the table. "Who is on that flight?" she demanded. "Laura Bennett, Michael Carter, Patricia Evans, Robert Yates is in the cockpit," the operations manager recited. "Then get me their files, now." Behind her, the booking system glitched again, flight reservations freezing as a security override initiated from someone's high-level access. "What's happening to the booking servers?" Elizabeth asked sharply. "Sir," an IT analyst responded, face pale. "Someone with board access credentials has triggered a halt command. They're locking down SK-123 and any outgoing data until further notice." Elizabeth stared at him. "Who has that authority?" The room fell silent. Then came the quiet reply. "Marcus Thompson." Back in seat 2A. Darius adjusted his blazer and watched as emails, alerts, and notifications poured in across two devices. One window showed a live ticker of Skylux's bookings being disabled by his security credential. Another displayed incoming responses from board members. One simply read, "We stand with you. Proceed." Officer Sarah Kim stood a few steps away, watching it all without interference. Laura was seated across the aisle now, quiet and rigid, her headset removed. Michael had gone pale. Patricia wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. James stood by the galley, quietly updating Emma and David, Emma's newest video, capturing Laura's laugh, Michael's smirk, and Patricia's entitlement, was now at 4 million views. Even Good Morning America had reposted it with the headline, "Silence No More, Black CEO Calls Out Airline from First Class Seat." Darius exhaled. The moment was no longer just personal, it was systemic. Elizabeth, still in the war room, now fielded calls from Skylux investors demanding a response. "We've shut off outbound flights as a precaution," she told them, voice trembling. "A full internal review has begun." But it wasn't enough. Another screen lit up with a breaking alert. FAA confirms active investigation into Skylux over racial discrimination claims on SK-123. Elizabeth threw down her phone. "Find me a path out of this." She whispered to no one in particular, but the walls were closing in. Legal counsel leaned forward and asked the room, "What happens if Darius pulls his stake?" Elizabeth didn't answer. She already knew. If Darius walked, the board would fracture. Skylux's IPO survival, weeks from now, would vanish on board the flight. A murmur had grown into movement. Several passengers now openly supported Darius, approaching him one by one. A woman placed a note in his hand. "My father helped start this airline. He'd be ashamed." "Thank you," a young man whispered. "You just saved lives with this." Even Sarah Kim, the officer sent to remove him, stood now not as an enforcer, but as a witness to history in motion. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "do you intend to continue the lockdown?" Darius nodded once. "Until accountability is met." He opened his laptop and typed one more message to Elizabeth. "Immediate action required. Terminate involved personnel or Skylux halts globally. My stake authorizes full audit. Decision window, 30 minutes, in the corporate boardroom." Elizabeth reread that email 3 times. "He's not bluffing," the CFO whispered. "You'll have to pick a side." Elizabeth looked around at her executive team, none of whom could save her now. Then she closed her eyes and said, "Fire them." The command hit like a gavel. The HR director asked, "All 4? Elizabeth opened her eyes. "Laura Bennett, Michael Carter, Robert Yates, and ban Patricia Evans from all Skylux properties indefinitely. Let the world know we don't protect people like this anymore." The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of furious typing. As the plane idled on the tarmac, a message blinked on the flight's internal crew tablet. Laura's eyes caught it first. "You are hereby terminated from your duties, effective immediately. Do not attempt to operate this flight." She gasped, stood up, but Sarah Kim raised a hand. "Sit down." Michael's tablet chimed next. His face crumpled. Patricia pulled out her phone. Checking for flights. There were none. Darius's voice cut through the cabin, firm and unshaken. "The airline doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to every passenger who's ever been told they weren't enough." The words hung in the air like a curtain finally lifted. The silence inside the cabin was almost reverent. Like the moment before a verdict is read aloud in a packed courtroom. Laura sat motionless in her jump seat, lips pressed tightly together, staring down at the glowing tablet screen that had just ended her career. Michael stood near the galley wall, his chest rising and falling with visible panic, still processing the finality of the message flashing across his own device. "Your employment with Skylux Airlines has been terminated, effective immediately." Patricia, now red-faced and visibly trembling, gripped her designer handbag like it might anchor her in a world that was slipping through her fingers. Officer Sarah Kim hadn't moved from her place beside Darius, who sat once again in seat 2A, hands calmly folded, eyes steady, voice quiet but clear as he pressed send on the final board email. "To all Skylux shareholders," it read, "action has been taken to ensure this company never forgets who it serves or who it answers to." Moments later, an executive response lit up the screen. "Public announcement approved. Immediate press release in progress." Then came the crew notification overhead, not from Laura or Michael, but from a temporary override. A new voice echoed over the speakers. "This is Skylux Executive Communications. Crew leadership on Flight SK-123 has been relieved of duty. Please remain seated while alternate arrangements are coordinated. Thank you for your patience." The cabin erupted, not in chaos, but in relief. Passengers cheered. Some clapped, others cried. James Patel, who had stood silently near the galley, finally stepped forward, removed his uniform name tag, and handed it to Darius. "For what it's worth, sir," he said softly. "You just changed everything." Darius nodded, accepting it with the kind of quiet dignity that needed no applause. He stood up slowly, facing Laura and Michael now, who stared at him as if seeing him for the first time, not as a problem, not as a disruption, but as something undeniable. "Do you have anything to say?" Darius asked Laura. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. I thought you were. She couldn't finish the sentence. Darius didn't need her to. You thought I didn't belong here, he said, not angry, but truthful. Because of how I looked. Because you assumed power never wears my face. Michael opened his mouth to argue, but Darius cut him off with a glance. You mocked me, deleted my name from the manifest, called me a fraud, and tried to have me removed from a seat I helped fund. He turned to Patricia, who had shrunk halfway into her chair. And you, he said, offered $5,000 to erase my presence. That number won't even cover the legal fees for what comes next. Sarah Kim cleared her throat. Mr. Thompson, she said, the termination notices have been confirmed. I'll escort them off the aircraft at your signal. Darius nodded once. Now. Sarah turned, motioned to Laura and Michael. Laura stood slowly, legs weak. Michael lingered, his mouth set in defiance until Sarah placed a gentle but firm hand on his arm. It's over, she said. Patricia tried to follow them, but Sarah blocked her path. You're not staff, she said, but your access is now restricted by order of the board. Patricia froze, humiliated, her voice barely audible. But I'm platinum preferred. James answered for her from behind. Not anymore. One by one, they were led down the aisle, faces pale, backs hunched, heads lowered, as they passed Darius. None dared meet his gaze. When the cabin quieted again, Elizabeth Ward's face appeared on the main screen near the cabin divider. The CEO of Skylux, speaking from her Chicago office, delivered a statement that would make headlines for weeks. Effective immediately, Skylux Airlines has terminated 3 employees involved in the discrimination incident on Flight SK-123. Our company deeply regrets the harm done to Mr. Darius Thompson, a valued board member, partner, and leader in equitable aviation. She paused, then added, We are implementing sweeping changes, and this moment marks a turning point in how we define service, dignity, and accountability. The screen faded. The passengers were silent now, not stunned, but sobered. Then one voice from the back said softly, Thank you. Another followed. He did that. Emma caught it all on video. Marcus remained standing. I imagine many of you are wondering who I am, he said, scanning the cabin not for sympathy, but for clarity. My name is Darius Thompson. I'm the founder and CEO of Tech Trend Innovations. I own 35% of Skylux Airlines, and I serve on the advisory board of the Department of Transportation. He let the words hang there, let them settle like weight placed gently on the chest. I fly frequently, not for luxury, but because I believe in building an industry that includes all of us. Murmurs filled the air, a few gasps. One woman placed her hand over her heart. Another man simply bowed his head. Today wasn't about a seat, Darius continued. It was about what happens when the people entrusted with power forget who they serve. Emma's phone buzzed as she posted a new clip. Darius standing tall in 2A. The words, "He owns the airline," overlaid in white text. The post reached 1 million views in 5 minutes. But more than numbers, it sparked emotion. Darius looked once more to Patricia, who still hadn't moved. You can leave the plane voluntarily, he told her, or wait until airport security does it for you. She stood and walked down the aisle, silent, alone. This time, no one applauded, but they all watched, and in their eyes, there was something different now, not just awareness, but respect. The next morning, the world woke up different. Across cable news, social media, and industry bulletins, one name stood above the noise: Darius Thompson. The man who refused to give up seat 2A had become a symbol overnight, not just of defiance, but of deliberate, dignified reform. Major outlets aired footage from Emma's live stream, now viewed over 50 million times. Editorials called it a watershed moment in aviation history. At Skylux headquarters, change moved faster than anyone expected. Elizabeth Ward issued a company-wide memo titled The 2A Standard, announcing the immediate rollout of a new initiative led by Tech Trend Innovations, a comprehensive digital system called Fair Skies, designed to detect, flag, and eliminate bias in seating, customer service, and crew behavior. Darius had built the platform years ago, but now, backed by public outrage and board authority, he activated it across all Skylux aircraft within 72 hours. No more invisible profiling, no more hidden manifest edits, no more whispers behind curtain dividers. Every employee, from gate agents to pilots, would undergo required equity in action training, including simulations, real-time assessments, and passenger interaction reviews. Darius insisted it be public-facing, measurable, and audited by third-party observers. If it isn't transparent, he told Elizabeth bluntly, then it's just decoration. Back on the ground, the reactions were seismic. Airports across the country posted support signs for Darius's reforms. The DOT fast-tracked legislation known as the Passenger Fare Access Act, using Darius's experience as the cornerstone testimony. Other airlines scrambled to catch up, some announcing their own internal reviews, others discreetly contacting Tech Trend to inquire about licensing Fair Skies for their fleets. "You've reshaped our industry in a day," one CEO admitted in a private call. But for Darius, the spotlight wasn't the goal, reform was. He met privately with Sarah Kim and James Patel that week, offering both of them positions in the new Fair Skies training division. Sarah accepted on the spot. James, still shaken by what he'd witnessed, nodded slowly and said, "I want to make sure no one feels as powerless as I did." Emma Chen, now a household name, declined formal employment but agreed to serve as media liaison, helping coordinate survivor stories and real-time documentation. Together, they created a movement rooted not in vengeance, but vigilance. Inside Skylux's hangars, visible change took shape. New onboarding included video testimonies from passengers of color, elderly travelers, and disabled customers who had been dismissed, delayed, or degraded over the years. Crew evaluations were no longer just about efficiency. They now measured dignity. Darius oversaw each rollout personally, flying coach and first class unannounced to test the system in silence. He sat quietly in rows where he once would have been questioned, and when no one asked him to move, when no one whispered, when no one second-guessed his seat, he knew something had shifted. Not everything, but something. Reporters asked him often why he didn't just sue, why he didn't lead with anger. Darius always answered the same way. Accountability changes headlines. Systems change futures. That message landed hardest with those who had once stayed quiet. Former Skylux employees wrote public apologies. Crew members from other airlines emailed him anonymously, saying, "Thank you for giving us language to say what we've felt for years." Even Patricia Evans, now banned from every Skylux flight for life, issued a public statement of regret. It didn't go viral, but Darius saw it. He didn't repost it. He didn't reply. But he read every word, and quietly. He chose not to ruin her life, though she'd tried to ruin his. And so, from a stolen seat, a locked manifest, and a dozen recorded lies, Darius built a new standard, one where presence could no longer be erased by bias, and power would no longer hide behind protocol. First class was no longer a place for exclusion. Under Darius's watch, it would become the front row of accountability. Time passed, but the memory of what happened on Flight SK-123 refused to fade. In corporate offices, training centers, and boarding gates across the country, Darius Thompson's stand in Seat 2A had become more than just a trending topic. It had become a case study in consequence. Laura Bennett's career ended the day she was escorted off that plane. Attempts to file for wrongful termination failed swiftly when the internal audio and video records surfaced. Aligning perfectly with passenger testimonies and Darius's live-stream data, she quietly moved to another city, changed fields, and disappeared from public view. Michael Carter, who had once barked orders with smug certainty, found himself unemployable in aviation. The recordings of his laughter as Darius was accused, dragged into news cycles and training seminars alike, became cautionary tales of what unchecked power looks like. Even Robert Yates, the silent pilot who never left the cockpit during the entire incident, was released from his role, his complicity judged not by action, but by silence. And Patricia Evans? She became a footnote. Her travel privileges were revoked, her memberships canceled, and her face, once smug with entitlement, now synonymous with the downfall of those who thought money could buy immunity. But Darius didn't dwell on their falls. He had something else to build. In the months after the incident, he expanded Fair Skies into multiple industries: rail, rideshare, even healthcare. His technology was no longer just a passenger equity tool. It was becoming a cultural shift. People wrote him letters, thousands of them. Some were from passengers who had experienced discrimination and finally felt seen. Others were from employees in uniform, thanking him for giving them a model of how to stand up without getting fired. One letter stood out, a handwritten note from a retired Skylux pilot. "We were told to keep our heads down. You reminded us to look up." Darius kept that letter in his travel bag, always within reach. But it was what he did next that defined him. He offered Michael Carter an unexpected opportunity. Not a job, but a place in Fair Skies' redemption cohort. A program designed not to punish, but to teach, to listen, and to repair. At first, Michael refused. Then one day, he showed up, quiet, humbled, changed. Darius didn't shake his hand, not at first, but he listened. And that was enough to begin again. Emma Chen continued her work as a media advocate, founding a digital archive called Voices from the Aisle, a platform where passengers and crew alike could share their experiences anonymously or openly. Her first post? A split-screen image of Darius standing in Seat 2A beside a shot of Laura walking down the jet bridge. Caption: "You never know who's sitting next to you." The post lived permanently at the top of the site. James Patel became director of in-flight culture for Skylux, and his first policy initiative was simple. Every crew member must fly as a passenger once a quarter. He believed empathy wasn't taught. It was felt. Sarah Kim left airport policing a year later and joined the Department of Transportation's Equity Task Force. Her report on the incident helped pass 3 national guidelines on passenger rights. In an interview, she said, "I didn't stop an injustice that day, but I watched a man transform one. And Darius? He flew often, never with fanfare, never with a camera, but passengers recognized him. Some nodded, some whispered, a few stopped to say thank you. He always smiled and said, 'It wasn't just me. It was all of us.'" 1 year after SK-123, Skylux renamed its flagship aircraft the M. Thompson. A brass plaque was installed beside Seat 2A. It read simply, "No first-class cabin would ever look the same again." Have you ever been told you didn't belong, simply because of how you looked, spoke, or stood your ground? If this story spoke to your heart, subscribe now. And if you've lived through something like this, share your story in the comments below. Your voice is part of the change, and the world needs to hear it.